From a professional standpoint, can you describe the process one has to go through to challenge a book?
Sure, I did. I was trying to look back at the questions because I figured I'm going to anticipate some of these questions. I think that the process is probably fairly similar for challenging a book. I would hope that most libraries will have some policy that has, this is the step-by-step. If somebody comes and says, I object to you having whatever material in the library, that there be a standard, probably a form or some kind of standard format that person would have to explain what their objection is, and that the library officials would then have to consider and respond to the objection. Those policies ought to be created and they ought to be passed at the library board level so that the individual librarian has kind of that protection of all the way up to my board of trustees. This is the process that we use.
Could you name some of your library's policies concerning censorship, like the process of, the prevention of?
Our old director said the job of a librarian is to have something in the collection that offends everyone. And that's, if you look, I'm going to refer to the ALA Bill of Rights really quick. It's books and other resources should be provided for interest, information, and enlightenment for everyone in the community. So literally that's something for everyone. One thing that we do generally require is that any item we buy, whether salacious or not, has positive reviews. We look for those professional reviews. And not always. If a patron asks for an item, we'll order like almost everything. Exception would be DVDs that are rated above R. We follow the standard policy that most movie theaters would follow. Yeah. If it's unrated, we'll buy it, though. We just wouldn't purposely buy, like, pornography. Also, in our computer lab, we have policies against accessing pornography online. We do block for some of that stuff. A patron always has the right, though, if they're trying to access an online material and they believe that it was blocked erroneously, for us to unblock it. We will do that, and we have done that in the past. So basically, we don't buy or permit pornography, and other than that, anything goes. we really, we have a very diverse community, especially in our other 4 branches. We are pretty open. I have a story from yesterday, actually, about that.
Would you name some of your library's policies concerning censorship, such as the prevention of or the process of?
Okay. Well, most school libraries typically or should have in place a policy regarding what's called a challenge. And it's usually a written policy. And so if something happens where, for instance, a parent would come and say, what? You have this book on your shelf? I don't like it. There's an official policy the school follows. And so, so anyway, I always had a written policy, and I'm at CSG, and they have a written policy. So that kind of is what you mean? Like, yeah. So it's like a preventative measure that if something happens, you already have a policy in place. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, what good school, and let me know if I go too fast, what good school librarians do is they also make sure they select books that are suitable for what age groups they're working with. And that's different than a public librarian, like at a public library, because in a public library you have every possible age range. Mm. But in a school library, there's parameters of ages. So, for instance, I'm called a lower school librarian, so I'm preschool through 5th grade. Mm-hmm. So I necessarily wouldn't even select books that should go in a high school library. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's in some ways how you're thinking about what's a challenge. But at the same time, you also have to not be afraid of the challenge, because you have to think about all the people in front of you and the different interest your needs. So can I give you an example?
Sure.
So for instance, there would be some people who might be uncomfortable with their children reading something about something like a sexual abuse or homosexuality, something like that. So some parents might not like that. But you are not thinking of just like one parent and their issue or one family and their concerns. You have to think about everybody you're buying books for, because every child has different needs and wants. Does that make sense? So you have to get age-appropriate stuff for a range of issues. So a good librarian wouldn't say, well, I can't have anything on homosexual issues because that might upset somebody. You think, I might have somebody who needs to read that. I need to have that. But you also would get something suitable for a 4th grader as opposed to a 10th grader who would have different abilities to understand. Does that make sense?
Right.
And it challenges, like when someone first raises concern and then it goes to the level of censorship if action is taken to remove the book.
A ban.
And librarians really fight against that quite a bit,
How do you think censorship is a hindrance of intellectual freedom, like in what fashion, I suppose?
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. If a book or another library item is censored, we use censorship as a term that essentially describes the item being removed from the library shelves or not being being de-accessed from the library for reasons of somebody's personal convictions. Then that material ceases to be available to people who might want or need to use it. And so if the censorship case were allowed to proceed and the book were removed from the library, then there's a piece of information that for no other reason than that somebody objected to its content is no longer available for the rest of the community to use and to access. Now, granted, there might be all sorts of other ways that you can access that material. It might be a book that a person could purchase. It might be something that's available online. But I don't think that exonerates our hypothetical library from having messed up its responsibility. For one thing, if it's a book that needs to be purchased, then you've put an onus on the person to have the money and to be able to purchase it. There's just... It can be it can become a slippery slope where there's always a but. So we just kind of keep it at that higher level of we will not remove material for the reason of it interfering with somebody's personal convictions because that is a hindrance on intellectual freedom.
How do you think censorship of books or literary censorship, how do you think that affects American society, if at all?
It's gross. There's this book. Have you heard of The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie? Have you read it?
No, I haven't.
Go read it this week. It's gotten banned so many times because at the beginning, and I think this is really the only reason it's... The other thing is, like, if you ever write a book, you should be real tame for the first, 20 pages because a lot of parents don't make it past the first 20 pages, But, it starts out with this kid being like, yeah, I love to masturbate. It's the best thing ever. He's super he's like a 14-year-old boy and he's just talking about it. It's banned in so many states for that. Ridiculous. It's the most touching, wonderful, truthful book. I'm in love with that book. It should have won it won the National Book Award the year it came out. So I think it's awful. And there are a lot of, you hear stories about Absolute True Diary got banned, so some rich guy donates a copy to every kid in the school. So you hear stuff like that happening. But I think it moves away from inclusion. If we're all in this society and we're all have to live with each other, we need to respect the fact that if you're not doing something violent or dangerous, that it's okay. And if you want to read a book where a kid says masturbation's great, then you should. And our job as a library is to provide something for everybody in the community. That's why I think libraries are the greatest institution for not censoring. I really think that libraries that should be ashamed of themselves, and we are not one of those libraries. We definitely buy whatever we think is of quality, of entertainment value, of things that we need, we buy. So it's hard for librarians to and we get legitimately upset when a patron or a staff member has a problem with an item. That's just it's not our job to judge people what they want to check out. You check out whatever you want. Take it up with your mom. I'm not your mom. You do what you want. So I don't know. I think it's really disheartening when you see school boards that are having to defend a title that an English teacher was teaching. That's what happens with Absolute True Diary a lot of the time. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's a difference between appropriateness and censorship, and it's I think a pretty wide gap. Like, appropriate for an age group is important. You're not going to give a 14-year-old 50 Shades of Grey, you know? I mean, there are things that are inappropriate for certain ages, but that is not my job. That's your mom's job. And it's disheartening when, especially for schools, when it's like the board is trying to defend a title from a family it wasn't appropriate for them, but that doesn't mean it wasn't appropriate for everybody else. And it's a lot harder for schools in that, because we can always say, well, don't read it then. But if it's on the curriculum, that becomes a different discussion. But I think a lot of the time people that want to ban books are mistaking age appropriateness for censorship. Like, because it's not appropriate for your child doesn't mean that you're censoring it from every other child.
How do the limitations of reading materials affect readers, especially younger readers?
That's a good question, too. One of the reasons I have heard why it's important to have such a range is I heard a professional speaker once about censorship saying, let's just say you have a kid in front of you that is dealing with alcoholism at home. You know, she got a parent who's an alcoholic, or a child who might have been molested in her life, or a child who is dealing with the death of a parent. You don't know their personal agonies inside. They might keep everything quiet, but they're suffering in ways that you can't know. And maybe they have access to a therapist, maybe they don't, but books act as their own therapy. So kids often will look for a book with a similar story to reassure them, to give them hope, because children's books, even high school books, often are hopeful at the end. Like adult books, they can be miserable. But young adult books and children's books, there's often hope. And she said, to deny controversial subjects because parents don't want, or ignoring kids who really might need to know that they're not alone. So that's why I think it's really important. Now, I don't know that every kid's going to come to me like saying, you don't have any books on this and I'm suffering from it. But I believe that books are lifesavers in their way. So I think you have to have a range of subjects. If that makes sense?
Do you think books help readers?
Oh, bibliotherapy? Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, bibliotherapy. I used to go to the Scioto Juvenile Correctional Facility before they closed, which was in Delaware County, and it was teen inmates, and this was like not a holding facility. Some of these kids were like murder infant until they're 21, transferring to an adult facility. It was like serious. And we read a lot of books there that were really serious, heavy, like gangs and drug addiction and teen pregnancy and like those really heavy topics. And those kids did not want to read anything but those topics because their life was hard. Like, what are you going to sit down and read, like, I don't know, Harry Potter if you were in a gang and were raped when you were younger? Like, statistically, it was something like 65% of everybody in there was already a parent. The rate of sexual abuse was really high. I mean, the rate of violence was really high. So yeah, no, of course it does. And that's the thing that, like, if your kid is 14 and you're homeschooled and everything's been great, then yeah, like they should read what they associate with, and we have those books too. But I want to have that stuff that asks hard questions because there are kids that need that answer. Yeah, I know. I'm a big proponent of. I even have like kind of urban fiction, like stuff that, like, statistically Delaware County is 92% white or 93% right, but we also aim for a very multicultural collection to start with. But you never know. I buy a little bit of everything. Like, you just never know. I'll buy the books about lesbian relationships and transgendered kids, and that's the big one right now, is like any transgender book that comes out I'm buying right now. So yeah, the idea is really that anybody who comes in will find something that they can relate to.